Hello everyone, I'm Sander van het Noordende here at Accenture in New York, and in the spirit of Pride Month we're organizing an LGBT panel to discuss the LGBT state of the nation around the world. We have three distinguished panelists. Let me introduce them to you. We have Kate Staff, who is the Operations Director of All Out here in New York. We have Graham Reed, who is the LGBT Rights Director of Human Rights Watch. And we have our own Nelly Borrero, who is the Accenture Managing Director of Global Inclusion and Diversity. So welcome to all of you. Maybe Kate, let me start with you. We've made so much progress. Why do we still need Pride Month?
Well, I think we've made a lot of progress in certain places in the world, but if we look at it globally, there's a lot more to go, both within the U.S. context and within the European context, and also in the rest of the world where there's many places where you can't, for example, even have Pride. So I work for an organization called All Out. One of the things that we were talking about earlier that we'll be launching next month is a fundraising campaign to fundraise for Pride in Uganda. We did that last year as well. It was raided by the police, people were injured, they were hurt, so it's something that isn't easy everywhere, and something that we really need to be supporting around the world in places like Uganda and in other places where there's not even a presence of Pride. I think also here in the U.S. context, it's one right now so important to show our solidarity and our community to the current administration and the world, and have a chance to get to celebrate that.
Graham, I mean, I know you're traveling a lot, and you have a lot of people in your network working on the various issues. What's sort of the one that keeps you up at night these days?
The single issue that really does keep me up at night is the situation in Chechnya. It's really an extreme circumstance there, where there's an active purge of gay men that is orchestrated by authorities and government officials there. And we see a level of brutality that we seldom see in other parts of the world. But I see it as an extreme version of a process of social exclusion of a minority group, where in this instance it's seen to be a kind of purge, a kind of social cleansing purge of gay men that's taking place in Chechnya. And we see grades of that in other parts of the world. I think whenever there's a law that specifically discriminates against a minority, that says that this isn't part of our culture or not part of our tradition, it's the same kind of rationale that excludes a certain group of people. And that's the kind of issue that we see reproducing itself all over the world, and that we at Human Rights Watch document the kinds of abuses that are taking place in order to lobby for change.
Nelly, let me move to you, because I mean, as Accenture, we don't operate in these very difficult countries, but we also operate in a number of countries where being LGBT is not as straightforward as in some other countries. I mean, how do you see the progress we have made or we are making, and where do you see the challenges in some of the more difficult countries for us?
So I think that's critically important to any organization. And for us, we always pause and assess and pivot when we need to pivot. But our focus continues to be to empower every single person that joins our organization.
I mean, of course, we have great leaders in Accenture, but not always, I mean, even in Accenture, not always all leaders are on board on all, I mean, we have not just the LGBT agenda, but sort of the other agendas as well. So how do you sort of deal with that in your day-to-day life? I mean, just sort of...
Yeah, it's all about education. I could share one example that I think resonated really well with so many people. I was conducting a class around leading a diverse workforce, unconscious bias, micro inequities, all the things that we talk about. And there was one particular leader that stood up and said, I don't understand why we have to have a focus on the LGBT community at the time. He said, I understand the women's approach, I understand ethnicity, but I don't understand this piece of it. Everyone looked at him a little bit horrified, and I looked at him with a huge smile on my face, because I'm thinking he's asking what others are wondering. So he's courageous to ask the question. I love courage in leaders. And I said to him, let's do an exchange here. I said, I see you have a wedding band on. I'm going to assume based on your comments that you're married to a woman. He goes, well, of course. I said, well, it's not always of course. I need to ask. And then I said, suppose that I tell you that tomorrow when you come into work, it will work against you if you say you're married to a woman. Suppose I said to you that talking about celebrating things with your family, with your children, is something that you will feel that can also work against you. How would that feel if you couldn't bring your true self to work, if you couldn't put up those pictures, if you couldn't talk about what's critically important to you in your personal life? And he paused and he said, that would feel terrible. And I said, that's the point. The point is that we're about creating a culture where everybody could bring their authentic self to work without fear of anyone having any opinion about their orientation that will impact their career based on their personal beliefs. So it is standard through a lot of discussions, a lot of trainings to bring people along, because what I find is that while we have leaders that sometimes have varying opinions, when you really sit down and have a conversation about humanity and about being truly human, which is what we talk about a lot right now, they start to get it. It's a matter of education, and I'm always about educating, always.
Right. Maybe back to Kate and Graham. How do you guys see the role of business in making progress in the work that you are doing? Is there a role for business? If so, what does the role look like?
I mean, I think, what really resonates is the need to have different voices that are speaking out on the same issue. So often this is a highly polarized debate. And I think business has a critical role to play in terms of providing the visibility, to providing a clear and consistent message of inclusivity as part of what business does. To give a concrete example, I'm thinking about Pink Dot in Singapore, that had historically been supported by multinational companies. And then the Singaporean government made a ruling to prevent multinational companies from sponsoring Pink Dot. And so what happened? Local companies stepped in this year and supported Pink Dot, some 50 local companies. So many more companies than usual, and local companies. So it seems to me there's a very good example of multinational companies playing a very significant role, openly supporting and paving the way in that instance, even despite the fact that they're prevented from supporting it in the future, for local companies to step in and say, yes, we're also going to support the Pink Dot Festival.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's many roles that business can play. I mean, one of the things I think what Graham just highlighted is that business is another form of power in making change, right? I've been thinking about that a lot within the U.S. context right now, where you have, a president that comes from the business community that uses that as kind of a qualification of his, and the role that business could play in pushing for change here. So I think business definitely plays a big role in terms of being outspoken, pushing for change, showing that they want to have an inclusive workplace, and really bringing a sense of power to government. So I think it can be a way to check government as well. I think there's another component which I think I heard a lot in what Nellie was saying, which is also that human component. I mean, everybody has to go to work. Well, most people. Most people have to go to work. You're at work every day. You're at work more than when you're with your family usually. And so I think business plays a huge role in making sure that the work environment where most of us go for most of our time does feel good. It feels inclusive. It feels like where you can be yourself. And so I think that business really could be a leader in that and have a real impact on the day-to-day and lived experience of people.
Yeah, Nellie, I'm going to ask you a question. Yeah. This may be a tough one. We get asked as businesses every now and then to support certain initiatives, sign certain letters for different causes, whether it's LGBT or other parts of diversity. What are some of the principles that you sort of use to decide this one we're going to sign as Accenture, that one we're not going to sign, or here we're going to speak up, there we're not going to speak up? Because, I mean, there's so much going on in the world. How does that work in your brain?
So it works a lot in my brain, 24/7. But I'll start with an example, Sander. Most recently, we just signed on and we positioned our brand in Australia to support marriage equality, right? It's a hot topic in Australia right now. There were questions about a year ago that started, our organization is going to step in. What is going to be their position around this? We look at every situation differently. Our first approach is always the safety of our people, right? So when we think about different places around the world, then it is about the responsibility we have to our communities. We then get the right people in the room to have the conversation. I mean, if it was up to me, I'll sign everything. But we have to look at the whole landscape, and we have to think about how is this evolving the agenda internally and externally? Are we being good corporate citizens across the world? So we take every situation very seriously, and we gather the right people to have the conversations. We were one of the first to sign also in the U.S., years ago with marriage equality. In Singapore, when we had some concerns around, health care to provide for same-sex couples. How do we get around that? How do we work with the country, but how do we provide that for our people? So we got very creative in doing that. India, when the Supreme Court reestablished again, and you were part of visiting India and having those conversations, we quickly got on a call and said, we understand that we want to respect local governments and laws, but we also have to empower and advocate for our people. So we move forward with continuing our focus on the employee resource group for LGBT community. So we are very in touch with what's happening on the ground. And I think we continue to do a really good job of being responsible citizens for our brand, for our clients, and for our people.
Could I add to that a little bit? Because, if you think about how is it that political leaders are able to manipulate homophobia in so many parts of the world. So there's this kind of invisible minority that seem to be threatening. And it's partly because it's so invisible. So there's no individuals that people know who identify openly as lesbian or gay or transgender. And so if there are companies operating in which there are people who are visible and open and successful and included within that company, that in and of itself sends a very powerful message, because it provides an image, a person, a name to this concept LGBT that otherwise is presented in this kind of scary fashion. And when people don't know anyone who's LGBT, that really feeds into the possibility of stereotyping and
No, absolutely. And we hear a lot from people that join our organization that they join because we're so focused and so aggressive and so bold around this agenda. And they feel it's going to be a very safe environment to join. So we are hearing that on the ground in many places where we operate. And it goes back to the line that we always use is we want to make sure that anyone that joins the organization feels that no matter what difference they represent is never going to get in the way of reaching their goals, so they can, achieve those goals. I also know that, if people are in a situation where it feels very lonely and they feel very different, it's hard to have the courage to come out. It really is hard. That's why I think allies play such a significant role in really positioning this agenda to evolve and continue to evolve. So, I recently was at an event where we had members of the LGBTQ community and we had allies. And it was a room full of over 100 people. And I asked for the allies to raise their hands, and they proudly did raise their hands. And I said, okay, so what makes a good ally? Because I really want people to understand that sometimes it goes beyond wearing the lanyard supporting LGBT. It goes beyond having the stickers on your laptop. It is about how are you using your voice. And I share with people, we have a voice, we have to be heard. And we have to be heard from the perspective of if we see anything or we hear anything that goes against what we're trying to achieve, to be an inclusive workforce, then as allies, it makes it a lot easier for us to fix the issue, to address the issue, and not to be shy about it. So it is a role that when people take that on, they have to understand that it comes with a lot of responsibility and a lot of opportunity to make a change.
I second what Nellie said, and I also think that if you put all of the responsibility for change on the community that is being discriminated against, it makes it much harder. And I think as allies, you have to take responsibility as well for something that might not be happening to you, but that impacts your community. And I think that allies standing up and speaking out is so important, and I think also listening. I think one of the first jobs to be a really good ally is to listen. Do your research, become educated on issues facing the LGBTQ community, talk to people, listen to people who are activists in that community, and then try to figure out what you can do to help and support their agenda. And so I think it's really important to speak out and be heard, also in a very respectful way that follows the people who are at kind of the forefront of the fight, and really, you know, helping to elevate their voices and protect them when you can.
One last question to wrap it up. What's the one piece of progress you would like to make in the next 12 months?
I think that the most significant development for us internationally has been the appointment of the independent expert within the UN system. And so I've really got a lot of faith that that particular position and role is going to draw international attention, not just through the substance of the work that he does, which is very important, the reports that he'll produce and that'll be discussed in the UN, but that appointment represents a decade of work of many activists around the world pushing for recognition at the level of the United Nations. And that has also a very important symbolic role. It's like that point about leadership, is that once it's happening visibly and within the system of the UN, that LGBT rights are treated as part and parcel of the routine work that is taking place, that in and of itself is a very significant development. So that's where I put our energies in terms of the advances that have made in the UN.
That's a very, very good one, going from the top down. Mm-hmm. Kate.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is the rise of nationalism around the world, and the threat to progress in a lot of countries that have made progress over the years. And so something that we've been talking a lot about for 2017 is holding the line and making sure that progress isn't reversed in a lot of those contexts, and that we're still able to push forward for progress in places that still have a longer way to go.
Nellie?
So Sandra, I think if I think about it from the perspective internal to Accenture, our LGBT community is very outspoken, very engaged, but in a year, I would like to see more discussions around our women that are lesbians to talk about, you know, a little bit more about what they're doing, what they're accomplishing, their challenges. I think the gay community is very open. I would like to see that evolve more in the lesbian community. I would also like to see more evolved in the bisexual community and our transgender community. We have so many great leaders that can really identify, and we have to also make sure we create more awareness for the allies around the whole LGBTQ spectrum, either in the US or globally around LGBT. So I would like to see more of that happen, and it will happen.
Thank you very much, Kate. Thank you very much, Graham. Thank you very much, Nellie. And thank you all for watching, and let's all be a force for good change in the next 12 months for the LGBT agenda.